Hello, folks. Welcome back from lunch. We're continuing with our conversation about hardship. We had prompted you on question 3 before the break. Real quick, Tammy, anything that the department wanted to address before we move forward with the discussion?
Just that we've placed answers to some of the questions in the chat. So if they could just y'all take a look at that, let us know.
Okay, and thank you, Tammy. And just as a note, Lakeisha Wilkerson will be at the table in place of John Whitelaw for individuals with disabilities or organizations representing them for the afternoon. Just a reminder as to the discussion question that we're working with right now. How should the department consider operational limitations in administering a hardship process, such as limited resources, the need to rely on other agencies or external parties to provide data, and the challenges in requiring borrowers to complete applications? The department is really looking for specifics as to these questions in order to inform them on the next steps. So please keep that in mind. And we are going to endeavor to take a break at about the hour and 10-minute mark. So let's move forward. Wisdom, take it away, please.
Can the answers that were dropped in the chat be redropped again? They're not there.
Okay. Sure, someone from the department can handle that. Thank you.
Yes, I'll take care of it. Give me just a minute.
Okay. Thank you, Tammy. All right. Comments, questions on question 3? Kira.
I think it would be helpful for the department to provide more detail about what it perceives its operational limits to be. I think it's hard for us on the outside to try to project what those limits are. So to the extent you can provide additional details, that would be helpful for us.
Okay.
I think we're going to have
Cindy.
to give Tammy a minute because she's working on dropping the questions.
Ben is actually going to take care of that. So if Ben would come on camera,
Okay.
that'd be great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben.
As a big picture, I would say, this discussion about hardship represents a new work stream for the department. And so as you're aware, the department's been seeking funding increases for federal student aid, and we are not in the position where we have significant resources to add large numbers of staff, either in-house or on a contract basis, to do lots of additional work streams. And so I think here, really the emphasis is things that are application based. If things are application based, it would have to be a very streamlined application process with a general assumption that we do not have the resources to have, hundreds or thousands of additional staff to do any paperwork received.
Thank you, Ben. Just as an administrative point, Sarah Butts is coming in place of Sure Gamage at this point to the table. Thank you. All right. Based on the clarification provided by the department, any further questions, comments concerning number 3, question number 3? Jalil.
Thank you. I think on this question around the considering operational limits. So if there's hardship that we have good evidence either from the department or from outside research that borrowers are experiencing, but because of operational limits, lack of resources, lack of people power, whatever it may be, I also think that in itself should be reframed as a hardship. So if the department is not able to follow through on some type of process it's proposing because it doesn't have payment records or it doesn't have the people power to handle some piece, I think that in itself can also be framed as a hardship because there's not the resources the resources or the operational capacity to provide borrowers in hardship with what they need, and can be another way to expand some of these relief policies. So I would also like us to consider hardship also being the lack of resources or limited resources that the Department of Ed itself is declaring it has.
Okay, thank you, Jalil. Just as a reminder, folks, if you have anything that you would like to propose, please do so in redlined form and submit to FMCS facilitators. Otherwise, questions or comments, please place in the chat for the department's consideration. Thank you. Lane, you're next.
Thanks, John. Previous to this job, one of my jobs that I held was determining eligibility for a state-based program that had income and wealth caps. And I can tell you from personal experience that it is extremely difficult to try to confirm income and wealth for folks. So what I really want to urge is that an application similar to the one that came out last year for the $10,000 or $20,000 of relief, where someone simply had to mark a box. You know, maybe there's a range of boxes for these different categories we've talked about, and there's no required documentation needed after that. And then in instances where people are concerned about fraud or where it may be suspected, there could be some kind of auditing on that back end. But I just really want to say that I think it is worth having an application, and administratively, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to have to confirm additional documentation along with that application.
Thank you, Lane. Sarah, you're next.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that it has been our experience that borrowers across the income continuum, and no matter where they are generationally, are struggling with student loan debt. And this happens across the income continuum. It happens in certain workforces. It impacts borrowers' ability to save for their basic needs, save for retirement, to have funds available for emergency. And we gave a number of examples in the last session before the break, but there are any number of kind of different subsets of borrowers that can benefit from this relief. So we as a committee, I think, are struggling because we know that borrowers need this forgiveness, and that there are a number of different circumstances in which we've tried to highlight areas of focus. But we also do not want to have a complex problem, and we hope for automation. We also know the department doesn't have a lot of this information, such as individuals who are providing service and are not in a qualifying employer for some of the relief programs that are already existing.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other questions or comments as it regards to question 3? Lane, please.
I just wanted to bring up the public commenter yesterday who mentioned changing jobs after believing that she was eligible for the relief under the Biden administration's plan. You know, I think that having gone through that whole process, there's an error made in a subject line and an email that went out to folks, all of that. I just kind of want to raise that back up as being a hardship in and of itself. You know, a lot of folks thought that before they returned to repayment, their balance would be smaller. And even people who should have received relief haven't in a lot of cases. So I really just kind of want to bring that comment back into the space. I think it's really important to think about the folks who jumped at that opportunity last summer.
All right, thank you, Lane. Jalil, I noticed that your hand went up, then back down. Did you have anything you needed to add? Okay, thank you. All right. Anything as it relates to question 3? Vincent, please.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think specifically related to, I guess, a lot of these administrative hardships, a lot of the onus is going to fall on the servicer. So I'm either wondering, like, if any of the servicers might want to speak up and talk about what type of hardships might be alleviated through either some source of communication or what can make their job easier to implement these policies. Because I guess from what I've heard over the last couple of days related to these topics, they're solely relying on reading through these policies and making these determinations. And we've all talked about how they continue to make all these mistakes regarding who's eligible and who's not. I think we also need to think about how to streamline this process for servicers so that they also can be more effective in implementing these policies so that it's more fair and it's not going to put people in circumstances that they shouldn't be in.
Thank you, Vincent. To the extent that you were asking a question, if you could place that into the chat, I'd appreciate that. Wisdom, please.
Definitely echo Vincent's request in terms of hearing from the servicers, but think that the department should think about how they are prioritizing resource allocation, ensuring that we're allocating resources efficiently by targeting high impact areas. As folks have said, streamlining the process. I think something that's been echoed in these conversations is the more broader base that we think about these criteria, the more automation that is put into this process, the simpler it is going to be for the department with the lack of resources that are available. Talking about establishing partnerships and data agreements with other government agencies and external parties to provide the relevant data that is needed, since so many of that data isn't available from the department itself. And thinking about ensuring that there is clear communication to the borrower, right? I think investing in communication channels that can support borrower to ask questions and seek assistance throughout any process is going to be supportive of the department in terms of any operational limits.
Thank you. And I see, Scott, just real quick, to the extent that we're trying to inform the department, if we could, if you have seen the word automation and heard the word automation, and also streamline that phrase, if there can be any expansion on that. Scott, please.
Sure. I think from the servicer perspective, I think the department has highlighted in this question in particular sort of some of the challenges that we're going to face. I mean, as we're implementing multiple new programs, considering new things under this regulation, we have to be very mindful of the fact that oftentimes what we refer to as automated processes in terms of determinations become operationally at the servicer level very manual processes. And I think that's something where the department needs to look at what are the ways that they can take existing processes that happen today, leverage those, modify those in order to accomplish the end goals of the department and what they're trying to achieve through this rulemaking process. It also highlights, I think, the challenge of dramatically expanding the sort of the definition of what the waiver authority may or may not be here without congressional authorization, and consequently without congressional appropriation, means that we're trying to do more and more with less and less resources, and that becomes a real challenge. I think some of the discussion that's been highlighted here today goes back to what I suggested previously, which is that we need to be very thoughtful about not creating regulation that is overly complicated, that is virtually impossible for anyone to explain to borrowers. And so they become confused by the reality of the regulation, especially when they rely today on tweets and other communications that are shorthands, but not full disclosures of the nature of these programs. And then they make financial decisions. We had this very issue previously with the prior announced debt relief plan that once again was, failed to pass legal muster, and we must re-examine that again today, lest we repeat the same issue that we've had before. The department's got to be incredibly cognizant of that, and also making sure that as you're looking at all these programs, how do we prioritize them? Because in implementation, we also, I think, can all agree that we do not want to have programs that take years to implement as borrowers wait for whatever that relief is, if it can survive legal scrutiny. And the department has a plan for how to allocate resources appropriately to deliver on that promise. And absent those additional resources and money, you can pass all the regulations you want, but borrowers will be left in a position of having to try to understand when and how they're going to receive that potential relief, again, if it does happen.
Thank you, Scott. Melissa.
Thank you. And I sort of want to carry Scott's ideas just a little bit further. So we all know that the department is looking at a lot of large projects that they are currently implementing, including the return to repayment process, and they are flat funded to do so. And we recognize that and we empathize with them. We do, in our comments, have identified a lot of borrowers we would like to see relief, and some of the thoughts around getting those borrowers relief are tied to automation. But we know that automation in and of itself takes resources and takes people and money to do that, to actually process the automation, to identify them as having, being able to get the relief. So I guess my question is, we did have the proposal by the Biden administration to forgive student borrowers the prior borrowing that they were allowed to apply for that did not come to fruition. There was a simplistic application for that. I'm presuming that perhaps the department had allocated resources in order to follow through with that forgiving of the funding. So my question, I guess, is really back to the department. We brought a lot of ideas up today. We recognize that they are going to be administratively burdensome for the department to carry out, but there was a plan to cancel the borrowers' funding that we had collected applications for. So can we take those resources and allocate them to this particular, what we hope to be simplistic process of, as someone else had mentioned, simply creating another application process, collecting an attestation from students that they are in this situation, and then would that be available and an opportunity to actually cancel the debt for those students? We want to keep this simple, but we also know that simplicity sometimes comes with a price, and we want to make sure that we know what the price tag is. So I guess my question back to the department is, you indicate that you don't have the resources to do a lot of what we're asking to be done. What have you thought about your priorities, and do we know from the departmental level what actually you have available to you that you can offer to us to help use then those ideas to meet some of the requirements of waiving the funds of the students we've already identified? So I sort of am turning this question back over to the department.
So generally, no. We're talking about something completely different. We're not talking about the broad-based debt cancellation that was shut down by the Supreme Court. We know that that was a one-time spending on an activity that we are not going to do. Our appropriations are set by Congress each year. We don't know what our allocation is going to be for this year or for future years. So at this time, we cannot speak with any specificity on any more details about what our budget will be for any of the implementation activities or regulations that we formalize through the result of these negotiations.
Tammy. You're next.
Sir?
Yes.
Oh, I thought you said Tammy, sorry.
Waukesha, you're next.
Thanks. I just wanted to respond to a few comments that were made earlier about the length of time that it would take to implement some sort of debt forgiveness for borrowers. Currently, borrowers are waiting. I think years is fine because a lot of borrowers are waiting and still not receiving relief after death. So I think that's something that we should really keep in mind that some relief in a few years is better than no relief ever. And then another thing that I wanted to circle back on a comment made was about a lot of borrowers are receiving their information from tweets. And I think it's important to be mindful that the regulation shouldn't be that complex. And they should probably be in plain language at the level of a tweet. Keep in mind reading comprehension skills of borrowers with disabilities or people with other issues who maybe have trouble understanding those regulations and how to navigate through them. So just wanted to add that piece.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. And I realize this is only addressing piece of the process here, or of the question.
I think we may have lost her. Let's keep moving on. I will inject her back into the line as necessary. Ashley.
I just want to comment on resources to servicers and the burden that they are facing. Just from personal experience, again, I received loan forgiveness from the Sweet versus Cardona, and so has my husband. Unfortunately, those loans were supposed to be cleared off. They fell off Nelnet, which is both of our servicers. We had consolidated loans with them since 2020. As of this morning, which prior to in August, those loans were removed from our credit. As of this morning, $45,000 was now put back on my husband's credit report, reporting from Nelnet, even though Nelnet shows zero, but the Department of Education still has him in $12,000 of debt. So there's a lot of miscommunication happening between the servicers and the Department of Education, as well as reporting to the credit bureaus. And there is a huge problem when people, especially in our situation, we run a small business, when misinformation is being put on our credit reports from the servicers. Every time we have tried to call our servicer, Nelnet, it's a 2-hour wait or more. I think the last time he tried to call Nelnet, it was a 4-hour wait just to get a simple question asked, and all they did was say, you need to call the Department of Education, it's in their hands. And when we've called the Department of Education trying to find answers, they bounce us back to the servicers. So there's a lack of information coming from both the Department of Education and the servicers. They keep just pointing fingers at each other and go, oh, it's the Department of Education's responsibility. And the Department of Education says, no, it's your servicer's responsibility. So moving forward, we want to implicate all of these new programs where in the last year, those who've received forgiveness and have actually been on the receiving end of this, there's so many issues that are coming up that, how is the department going to handle the influx of questions, and how are they going to provide servicers, the resources to try to answer these questions? 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours on the phone means we're not working on our business. We're not taking care of our family. We're dealing with, ridiculous wait times, and this is just not me. This is
30 seconds remaining.
Over and over again, we're hearing issues from, folks that are struggling with just trying to communicate with their servicers.
Ashley, Yael, we lost you and didn't really get any of your comment. I would real quick before you begin, in the interest of time, I'm going to, after your comments, move on to question 4, unless there's any objection from the department. Yael, please.
Sure, and I apologize about that very poorly timed internet outage. One thing I wanted to say is, with respect to some of the categories that we've talked about today of information that may allow us to identify loans that would be eligible for some amount of cancellation, the servicers absolutely do have the capacity to do queries across their databases when they need to. And I say this as a person who is very intimately familiar with this. They most certainly can do this to the extent that it may require some amount of, creativity. That's appropriate. And I will say more than that, in a time when, there's been the need to turn things off, turn servicing back on, and learn information across different categories of debts, it should be just a basic requirement. In fact, I think it is a basic requirement that servicers be able to do this. And so, I would push back on any notion that the servicers can't take on some of the fairly straightforward work of identifying categories where those categories refer to criteria that are within the type of information servicers have about borrowers. And to the extent that change requests may be necessary to facilitate some of that, that is absolutely appropriate and should be a requirement for federal contractors.
Thank you very much. Administratively, Richard Haas is back in as primary at the table. I'm moving on to question 4. And just a quick note about question 4, I believe there might be a formatting error. Question 4 is, if the hardship process was based upon an application, what upfront criteria should be put in place before a borrower could apply, given the significant operational limitations on an application-based approach? There's a section underneath that. I think that probably should have been question 5. I'll be asking that at a later time. So moving on to number 4, any specifics that can help inform the department as to that question? Jessica, if you could hold on for a moment real quick, I'm going to move to Cynthia first.
Yeah, I just want to give a friendly reminder to everyone that the focus is on these negotiations and the topics that we are discussing. So although all your information is important, and the department certainly understands that, due to the time that we have allotted for this, we'd kindly like you to keep to the topics at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Jessica, go ahead.
I am having a hard time understanding where this question is coming from. My instinct is to say absolutely none. Every borrower should be able to apply for student loan debt relief. I think if the department has some idea that makes sense, I would be very interested to hear it, but I'm not sure how productive a conversation we can have in a vacuum, because I'm not sure that this group is really in a position to say, oh, certain borrowers shouldn't even be allowed to apply for debt relief.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. All right. Any other questions as it relates to question 4, comments, specifics to help inform the department? Please.
I just want to touch on accountability and prioritization a little bit. I have no idea what the contracting process looks like with servicers. I still am trying to understand what happens with NFSA and what happens at the servicers. I know there's a lot of moving pieces, and I also see a lot of debt that should have been or was discharged that's still being collected. I see borrowers who have loans that are paid off being reported late. So all of this to say that there's a lot being done with student loans, right? Servicers do a lot. I question whether they are always prioritizing the same things that the department or borrowers would like for them to prioritize. And similarly, one idea I have is some additional clarity for borrowers around the responsibilities of the department versus the responsibilities of servicers. A lot of my day dealing with complaints is going back and forth from the department to the servicer to the department to another servicer. So I think that would be just one other thing to consider is there any way to draw more clear lines around whose work is which, and maybe that could simplify some of it.
Thank you, Lane. If you could add those specifics into the chat, that'd be much appreciated. Richard, please.
Yeah, I also think it's really important, just finishing up with this question here, not to use upfront criteria to preclude borrowers from applying for relief based on any assumptions that we are going to make here today about whether or not we effectively hit all real hardship categories. I think it's important to point out and reflect here on overlapping trends. I think sometimes generational in the problems that we're identifying and the solutions that we're proposing. Borrowers have shared in a lot of the testimony we've heard how crippling student loan debt has made it hard for them to buy homes, start families, launch businesses, pay for childcare, put food on the table. And I feel like a lot of the solutions that we've discussed require that either first, the borrower is already in a state of total crisis, or B, that they've already spent most of their adult lives trying to crawl out from their loan debt. So I just think it's important to recognize that student debt across the board is a significant drag on the economy and on the middle class. It impacts all of the things that we cited above. So I do think it's important that we not do anything on the front end to preclude people from applying for relief, because I think that there's a lot of need out there that we're not going to cover with all of the bullets that we've discussed.
Thank you, Richard. All right, any other questions or comments as it relates to number 4? Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to that. Like I said, looks like a second portion of number 4. I think there may have been a formatting error. The question is, the department already offers income-driven repayment plans to assist borrowers who are facing monthly financial hardships over an extended period. Should a hardship approach consider past, present, and future circumstances creating an additional financial hardship? How could the department account for past, present, and future potential borrower situations in a streamlined manner? Anything specific, comments or questions that can help inform the department? Kira.
I would just like to raise that the department should not consider whether or not a borrower is enrolled in IDR as a basis to exclude them from debt relief. While we are incredibly grateful for the improvements to the IDR programs, not everybody will be able to benefit from them. So first, even under the improved criteria, the IDR plans are not affordable for everyone. They do not consider regional differences in the cost of living. In addition, borrowers who need it most may not be able to stay in it. While we appreciate the work that's been done to keep borrowers enrolled in IDR, there will still be borrowers who won't be able to enroll or stay enrolled in these plans, particularly for borrowers who have outstanding loans and who may not sign up for to allow the IRS to share income data with the Department of Education. Further, some distressed borrowers will not file their taxes because they won't make enough money. And there are also borrowers in Puerto Rico who do not need to file their taxes, and so they would not have that data and would have to provide additional documentation. Additionally, even borrowers who are able to enroll in IDR still experience other harms. We hear often from borrowers, even borrowers who are enrolled in IDR plans, that they are distressed by the volume of debt that they still have outstanding. We have borrowers who enroll in IDR plans who are still subject to debt scams, debt relief scams, because they want to get out from the burden of that debt so badly. They are so afraid of having this outstanding amount of debt, and they're afraid that programs like IDR will not continue into the future. In addition, they still have fear about, owing this debt period and the impact it can have upon their ability, as Richard said previously, to get a lease, to get a car loan, to get a mortgage, etc. So I would strongly discourage the department from considering someone's IDR eligibility as a basis to exclude them from the relief that they're considering here.
Richard.
Yes, so regarding future circumstances and questions about future potential borrowers, I want to reiterate the position that was shared yesterday and that I think has come up a little bit again today, that we strongly propose, we strongly advise removing the July 1, 2025 deadline in the regulatory text that we looked at yesterday so that we can help current generations and future generations of borrowers. And I think also in terms of streamlining, it could be valuable for the department to look at ways that it can baseline and predict future hardships, looking at functions like debt to income ratios similar to what are used in the GE program and other sectors of work that traditionally create hardships where the cost of the programs exceed the revenue people can expect from that work.
Thank you, Richard. Just a reminder, folks, if you have anything you'd like to put into proposal form, please do so in red line and send to your FMCS facilitators. Otherwise, questions or comments into the chat section. Lane, please.
This is maybe a little out of left field, but one thing I wanted to put out there in terms of past, present, and future borrower situations is the actual year in which somebody graduates from their graduate or undergraduate or two-year program. The reason I'm saying the actual year is that there's pretty clear data that people who graduated from college around the Great Recession, during COVID, and a couple other times are really struggling to repay that debt. So similar to looking at cohort default rates, are there years of graduation in which people are finding themselves particularly impacted? And that could be used kind of in the future as well, right? If some other thing comes up and I could say, okay, this year also is one of those years. So just a thought.
Thank you, Lane. Questions, comments on that second part of number 4? Anything specific to help inform the department? Kara.
Given that this is also following from our discussion with regards to the prior question, in terms of operational limits, et cetera, I would just note that requiring that a borrower show that they've experienced past, present, and will experience future hardship may complicate how the administration processes these applications, and it may add unneeded complexity to the applications that the department has to use to determine eligibility for relief.
Thank you. Wisdom.
Yeah, speaking to future borrowers, potential situations, I think there has to be criteria established to trigger an automatic review or adjustment in response to life events, financial changes, changes in income, family size, marital status. These are things that deeply impact people's ability in the future to be able to continue to repay. I know we've talked about streamlining documentation verification and leveraging of technology that can allow for integration with other agencies to verify income and financial information, and just thinking about ways in which the department can also consider past financial circumstances that continue to impact the future.
Thank you, Wisdom. As a note, Jalil Billship will be replacing Richard Haas for student loan borrowers, and Jalil, you're next.
Thank you. I just want to underscore what I think many of the other negotiators have shared is that the presence or being enrolled in the IDR plan shouldn't be considered as an answer for folks experiencing monthly financial hardship. I think that again, in my own research, again, which was majority participants who were enrolled in IDR, they're still reporting issues around being able to afford basic needs from housing, food, childcare, and even having a savings account. We also know that even from research such as Ben Miller's research at CAP, that a lot of that work showed that even with many borrowers, particularly Black borrowers, who we know often struggle the most with student loans, even when they were enrolled in IDR, they still were experiencing some of the issues around default, growing balances, and so on. So I like us to also highlight that work as evidence where, if I remember, Ben, you call for bigger and bolder solutions beyond IDR. And I think when we're trying to navigate and think about how to provide relief to borrowers, that we really use the evidence that we have around how these plans have failed to function and not make borrowers go through other hurdles that we've already tried out, other policies and programs that we've already tried out and seen a large level of dysfunction. So I just think there's so much here to remind us that things should be automatic, that if we are going to do application, it should be a self-report, that if we are going to try to verify, it should be something that happens on the back end after cancellation, and that we should make sure there's not limits on cancellation so that future, current, and past borrowers get the relief and the support that they need. So just really don't want IDR to be a barrier for people getting cancellation. And I also don't want the department to treat SAVE or IDR as a solution when both the department and the representative for loan services are saying you both don't have enough funding to actually operationalize the level of relief and support that borrowers need. So in sum, if you don't have the money, if you all are telling us that you can't actually support borrowers at the level they need, that again should be a part of how we approach hardship. That should be a main component of how we define hardship, is that you all actually can't run the student loan program at a level that is adequate and meets the needs of borrowers.
Thank you. A couple administrative notes. Jordan Nellum's coming back in for currently enrolled. Sherry Gamage also coming in for student loan borrowers, 4 years. A reminder, we're on that second part of the question 4 and looking for some specifics to inform the department. Melissa, please.
Thank you. So to address the issue of preventing future hardships, one of the hardships that has been cited thus far is the ballooning amount of loan that a student has on the books because of interest capitalization, interest applied during periods where the student is already experiencing hardship. And this may not fall under the waiver authority, but I will look to the lawyers to help figure out if it can. But in the future, if a student does apply for a forbearance or a deferment, they're already in a crisis state where they cannot afford to pay their loan. Can we not apply interest during that time frame so those future payments don't balloon for the student? And I throw that out there as a suggestion. And again, I'll let the lawyers decide if that falls into the waiver capacity or not.
Thank you, Melissa. Anything else as it relates to past, present, and future potential borrower situations? Okay, I am going to, in the interest of time, move on to number 6. Number 6 is IDR plans are based on federal poverty guidelines, which vary by family size. The department uses the federal poverty guidelines as an indicator of the amount of income needed for necessities that should be protected from student loan payments, such as food and housing. How should the department determine whether the federal poverty guidelines are or are not a reasonable approximation of a particular borrower's necessary expenses? specifics to help inform the department. Questions, comments? Questions or comments on number 6? Richard?
Yeah, I just want to point out that any federal guidelines regarding income and poverty levels, I don't think that they're going to be adequate. Cost of living varies so greatly across the country. You know, I'm looking at the data right now. The idea of a family four in a lot of states in this country living off of $30,000 is it's completely unsustainable. I think if there's going to be a metric here, it has to be regionally defined somehow.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Remember, if you have anything that you would like to propose, please do so in red line form to your FMCS facilitators. Questions or comments in the chat. Anything else as to question 6 regarding federal poverty guidelines? Kira.
I'd just like to second what Rich said, that the federal poverty guidelines do not account for regional differences in the cost of living. In addition, they fail to account for expenses like childcare costs, medical costs, et cetera, that can vary widely from person to person. And so they are generally under-inclusive unless you're capturing so much above the federal poverty guideline that then it's a question of why would you use that calculation in the first place. By way of example, the child tax credit goes up to, I believe it's 400% of the federal poverty guidelines, et cetera.
Thank you, Kira. Lane.
I agree with both of the previous commenters. There's generally an area median income that's determined by the state or by counties that could be used instead of the federal poverty level. The other thing I wanted to say here, I'm sure that this is not going to be changed, but I just would like it to be put on the record that the term discretionary income and the way it's used in the income-driven repayment plans is very confusing for, I would say, 100% of the people I speak with, because by using the term discretionary income, people assume that there's a more complex calculation being done in terms of their expenses and their cost of living and all of that. So the amount of time that I spend just explaining to people that discretionary income is not actually what you have left at the end of the month, but is rather a percentage of the amount that you earn over the poverty line, really just adds a level of confusion that I don't know is helpful or necessary. Just wanted to comment on that term. Thank you.
John.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo what Kira said and the others about the federal poverty guidelines, and to put them in perspective, just sort of to, so that folks know what numbers we're talking about. Federal poverty guidelines for 2023 for a family of 4 are 30,000. That's 100% of poverty for a family of 4, not taking into account regional variations. The number, you are living in desperate poverty if you are at the poverty guidelines, and there are people who, that is so far below quote hardship that the points that were made earlier, I think, were well taken, and I think it's important to know when we talk about the poverty guidelines what actual dollars we're talking about. So it's, we can look it up, but I think, to understand, for a family of 4, it's 30,000. For a family of 2, it is under 20,000. If you're at the poverty level, you are in destitution.
Thank you, John. Additional questions or comments as it regards question 6? Question 5, my apologies. Tammy, were you trying to say something? No?
No, my document has it right. So I'm just gonna look at my document and you You look at yours. I have us on 6, and we have 2 more to go after this. That's what I show.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you. Jalil.
I just have a question for the department in trying to understand just kind of the use or the justification around the federal poverty line. So I believe under SAVE is 225% of poverty, and reading the final rulemaking under repay, a lot of that explanation was around people experiencing less food insecurity. So can you all provide a little bit more clarification of how you use the federal poverty line and kind of how you reach the 225%, just so we can get a sense into just, I guess, the logic of how you process this? And
all that information is in the final rule, the notice to the final rule that was published. So there's extensive conversation between the NPRM and the NFR for the income-driven repayment plans. I would point the negotiators' attention to those documents for them to review all that.
Thank you, Tammy. Sherry.
I have a comment and a question. From my perspective, the federal poverty guidelines may be a good measure if you're at the lowest income possible, say for a family of 2, 3, or 4. But even there, they're insufficient in that they don't take into account the associated cost of living, as my peers have pointed out, in regional differences. Also, they don't take into account in a meaningful way for me, as a person, for people living on Social Security, as the majority of seniors are, especially as it applied to the $750 you'll have left to live on. People can't live on that. So my question is, why can't the 225% under SAVE be used across all programs?
Thank you, Sherry. Tammy?
We want to remind everyone that under the SAVE program, we protect $33,000 for a single individual and $67,000 for a family of 4. Those are pretty telling numbers that we, under the SAVE program, are protecting for those borrowers.
All right, thank you, Tammy. Sherry, could you put your question into the chat, please? I'm seeing that David Ramirez is coming in for Ashley Pizzuti for student loan borrowers 2 years or less, and David has his hand up. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I just want to also reiterate the poverty guidelines also don't account for the disparities in financial aid given between 2-year and 4-year institutions. The real cost of attending a community college is greater because we receive less in assistance and are also likely to have much less likely to have access to student housing, and therefore have to pay higher in rents depending on where the community college is located, and we also have to spend much more money on transportation costs. And so all of these things are not factored into the real cost of attendance when our financial aid packages are created. And I also wanted to elevate that community college transfer rates within 2 years is less than 3%. And so most community college students have to spend 4 or 5 years before they're able to transfer. And therefore, by the time they get to a 4-year college, they're no longer eligible for Pell Grant. They're no longer eligible for most of the state financial aid that people are given. And so they have to incur a lot more debt, and that's not accounted for.
Thank you. Yael.
Thanks. I just want to briefly respond to Tammy, and I assume that you're sort of highlighting those numbers because people have been talking about the poverty line itself, which is lower than what SAVE protects. But I actually want to note that the fact that through the IDR rulemaking, it was necessary to have a lot of discussion about how the poverty guideline itself was insufficient and SAVE needed to protect more income than IDR had previously been protecting is indicative of the fact that the federal poverty guideline is woefully inadequate. And that, thresholds increasingly don't protect enough income for individuals to actually meet their needs. And live a life free of the hardships that are imposed by student debt. So, you know, I think I know you directed Jaleel back to the NPRM and NFR, but I will note that there was a lot of discussion during the rulemaking as well about some of the complexities and difficulties with reliance on the federal poverty line. And I think for the purposes of what we're trying to achieve here, I think those problems are especially pronounced.
Thank you, Yael. Wisdom.
Definitely agree with Yael, but definitely want to speak to this from their perspective. Black borrowers facing unique challenges and disparities in income and wealth and accessing educational and economic opportunities. I think there's a couple key factors that should be considered or taken into account. First being the racial wealth gap. Black borrowers are more likely to have a lower household wealth than their white counterparts due to historical and systemic disparities. This wealth gap has affected their ability to cover necessary expenses. The department should acknowledge that the federal poverty guideline may not adequately account for the wealth disparities faced by Black borrowers. The second example being employment and income disparities. Black borrowers often face a higher rate of unemployment and underemployment and wage gap when it comes compared to white borrowers. And so when evaluating the adequacy of the federal poverty guideline, you have to recognize that Black borrowers may have a lower income and less financial stability, which can result in the difficulty of meeting basic living expenses. The third example is educational disparities. Black borrowers may have disproportionately impacted by predatory lending practices and for-profit institutions, leading to higher levels of student debt. The department must consider that Black borrowers may have a greater need for debt relief as they may be carrying a heavier debt burden and relative to their income. The fourth example being neighborhood and housing disparities. Residential segregation and housing discrimination has resulted in Black communities often having fewer affordable housing options. And so the department has to recognize that Black borrowers may face higher housing costs relative to the income due to limited housing choices.
Thank you, Wisdom. All right, we're at that point where we are going to take a break. If there's nothing else, Cindy, please go ahead.
I just want to reach out to the people who signed up or are on the waiting list for the public comment period. If you are listening on the live stream, please note that we are about an hour away from commencing on that. So we ask that you sign in prior to your start time or your assigned time, and waiting list, sign in about 15-20 minutes before either your start time or wait list. We would greatly appreciate it. One last reminder along that lines, if you log into this meeting with a different name than what you registered with, we need to confirm who you are. So if you know how to change your name once you log in, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. And if there's nothing else, Tammy, anything before we take break? Okay. Oh,
Yes,
go
sir.
ahead.
We're good.
Okay. A reminder, we've got 2 questions left that we're going to cover. The next question is, which of the items proposed by negotiators above in the summary from session 1 are most indicative of a hardship that would not otherwise be captured by an existing federal program, such as income-driven repayment, total and permanent disability discharges, or something else? That's the question that we're going to be addressing when we come back. We're going to take, it's 11:58. I'm in the mountain time. It's 2:58 or 1:58 in Eastern time. We're going to be coming back in 15 minutes at approximately 2:15. Thank you. Thank you, folks. Welcome back. We are continuing our discussion as it relates to hardships. Before we broke, I read a question. I'll reread it. Which of the items proposed by negotiators above in the summary from session 1 are most indicative of a hardship that would not otherwise be captured by an existing federal program, such as income-driven repayment, total and permanent disability discharges, or something else? That's the question that we're discussing at this point. Remember, the department is seeking specifics to inform its decisions moving forward. Just as a quick administrative note, we're going to be taking a break before public comment, which is beginning in approximately 45 minutes. Persons who are on the list, please sign in well before your assigned time slot. Questions, comments about what I just asked? Kira, please.
In many of the topics that the negotiators have already raised during session 1 and session 2, we've identified folks that fall outside of the limitations of the existing statutory discharges. There are plenty of folks who are disabled that do not qualify for a total and permanent disability discharge. There are plenty of folks that attended a closed school that may find that their income failed to enable them to repay their debt, who completed their program, so they're ineligible for a closed school discharge. And that's to say nothing of all the folks that we talk to who have no idea that they're eligible for any of these forms of statutory discharges. I speak to folks who have been in repayment for a decade or longer on debt that, had they known that they were eligible and that they had to apply, or had they been able to successfully navigate at times a very long application on their own, they could have discharged their debt and saved themselves from years of financial hardship. And so I would discourage the department from using the existing statutory discharges as a basis to exclude particular types of relief here, which I hope that I'm wrong, but it appears to me that this question is indicating, because too many people are totally unaware that they're eligible for these forms of relief. They will not apply. And even though that we are incredibly grateful that the department has increased its ability to provide automatic relief to borrowers under the borrower defense regulations, the post-school discharge regulations, false certification, total and permanent disability, etc., there will always be people who are missed, despite being eligible, who would still need to apply.
Thank you, Kara. I see Ben has responded in some form in the chat. So, Lane, please go ahead.
When I read this question, I feel like it's framed in a way that says that folks who are eligible for these programs are using them. And similar to what Kira said, maybe some folks don't know they exist, but I wanted to kind of add on to that for people who have applied for programs and been deemed ineligible, and in some cases were actually eligible for those programs. Borrowers who have payment history that was lost in transfers, so that they may actually be eligible for one of the existing programs, but they cannot access it. So one thing I wanted to kind of throw in here as a possibility is people who have been, have filed complaints with the department, people who have filed complaints with their state ombuds, who have worked really hard to try to gain access to relief they believe they're entitled to, and kind of what's the recourse for those people.
Thank you, Lane. Additional questions, additional comments? Anything else to add? Ashley, please.
When I asked this in the first session, and I never really got an answer, as far as what the department is doing to educate the public on these programs, what kind of social media outreach are they using? Is there a specific Instagram account or TikTok account that's for some of these policies? I know personally, every single day I get emails and people trying to join our Facebook group and our Reddit group. You know, as far as borrower defense goes, they had no idea that they are eligible for borrower defense. Only recently heard about the Sweet versus Cardona. So I think that there is a failure on the department for outreach in letting people know that these programs exist and that they're eligible for. I know that, you know, there was the Schedule C list. Nobody was contacted for Sweet versus Cardona. No one from those schools were contacted saying you might be eligible to participate in this lawsuit. It's up to the individual to seek out whether or not they might be eligible for these programs and not the other way around.
All right, thank you, Ashley. Which of the items proposed by negotiators above in the summary from session 1 are most indicative of a hardship that would not otherwise be captured by an existing federal program? Anyone want to add to that question? Questions, comments about that question? Richard, please.
I just want to add that there was a group missing from this bullet that comes up in all of our conversations. I'm not saying that it is the greatest indicator here, but it is important also to remember the borrowers who have the missing or broken data or who have been misguided, misinformed, or misled by the servicers. I think that that's an important group here. Again, not saying it's the first and foremost among the bullets, but I did notice that it was missing from that list. So as long as we were referring back to it, I thought I'd bring that up here.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Richard. Anything else to add to this question before I move on? Wisdom, please.
For this question, we're right to even talk about the expansion of this list, correct? So in expanding, I think it was the head nod I saw, in expanding the list, I think that things that should be added or another group is first generation college graduates. You know, oftentimes they end up helping up members of their family and become part of their family ecosystem. And so I think that's something that is able to be easily captured, especially as folks are filling out the FAFSA, filling out college applications, something that's easily identifiable, because this also is comprised of immigrant families, right? And recognizing that there are immigrants in our countries who are also facing continual financial hardships that can be identified through this group of people. I know we have representation from HBCUs, MSIs, and HSIs. I think that's also a critical piece that ties directly into those who receive Pell Grants. You know, oftentimes HBCUs receive less funding than other institutions. And so people are forced to take out more loans, including Parent Plus loans. And so I think these are things that can also be included within that list as well.
Thank you, Wisdom. Cindy.
Wisdom, I think I'm going to try to answer your question. I think the questions this afternoon have been developed by the department to get additional specifics and ideas that could expand the secretary's ability on waiver decisions. So I think you're spot on with that. This particular question, I think, is asking you to, the negotiators, to look at the list of ideas that you generated in session 1 in the summary that is included with this hardship issue paper, and let the department know if there are any of those that are most indicative of a hardship that wouldn't otherwise be covered or captured by an existing federal program. I don't know if that helps or not.
Thank you, Cindy. Richard.
Yeah, I think we understand the distinction between adding to the list and trying to identify which is most indicative. I do think it is next to impossible to identify which one would be most indicative of people experiencing hardship. I feel like we've spent the last 4 or 5 hours talking about how hardship manifests itself in so many different ways across so many different metrics. So I think it would be really, really difficult to pinpoint one of these bullets. That said, I do think continuing to look at the importance of loans that exceed a certain age or that predate 2010, I think is gonna be an important bullet for us to look at.
Thank you, Richard. Kira.
I just want to second Richard's call that it's tough for us to rank which category is experiencing the most hardship versus who is experiencing the least. I will say, in my experience, the borrowers that we work with who fall across these categories are watching their ability to to pay for their housing, to pay for their food, to pay for their medication be endangered by the existence of their student loan debt. They're unable to pay for childcare. They're unable to pay for transportation. They're unable to get a lease in some cases, or they're unable to get a job or to pass a security clearance to get various jobs. I mean, the ways in which hardship manifests for people varies, and it varies across each of the categories that we've identified. We can identify that it is more likely for people within these categories to experience these forms of hardship if they fit within these criteria. But to say that one group is experiencing more hardship from another, I think is an almost impossible task for us to be able to accomplish today.
Thank you, Kira. Sure, please.
Yes, I tend to agree with Kira in that it is impossible, because if you look at the bulleted items, people could have actually received a Pell Grant, attended an institution that's closed, have significant child or dependent care expenses, medical expenses, file for bankruptcy, didn't finish their programs, and or over a certain age. So to put us in the position of choosing one that is most has the most press seems a little unrealistic, because the people who fit the hard definition of hardship, as I was thinking of it as we were coming up with this list, actually span across these categories that are here, right? And I know that, even going back to the gainful employment piece that we talked about earlier today, there are groups of people who fit these particular categories, the ones that I just named, who are also not underemployed or whose degree is not matching what they're doing today because the nature of the job that they train for has changed, or that the institution or the system in which they work has also changed. And what comes to mind immediately for me is adjunct faculty. People go and get PhDs in order to be able to teach, but the situation out in higher ed has changed tenure. Now, I am aware that that adjunct faculty can apply for relief if they work on an average of 30 hours, which equates to 3 credit classes per year. But often folks aren't able to do that either, because institutions, especially small liberal arts colleges and even larger institutions, are shifting and downsizing. So again, to reiterate, to choose one category when people may meet multiple indicators of hardship within the categories that we identified, it seems an insurmountable task. The other group that's not represented on this bulleted list is formerly incarcerated borrowers whose earning income, their potential for future income, and who may get jobs but are underemployed because of the public perception of what having a felony record means.
Thank you, Sharon. Lane.
I want to share a borrower story. This is someone I worked with quite a few years back when I was a student loan counselor, and she was an elderly person who received retirement benefits, and that was her only income. So she had defaulted on her student loans at one point, and the reason she had defaulted, she definitely qualified for a $0 income-driven repayment plan, but the reason she defaulted is because she had a brain injury. So she didn't remember that she had to recertify her income. It was just one of the most difficult borrower situations I've ever worked on because she was on the verge of homelessness because she needed to figure out how to get out of default on her student loans. So, a group that I think is pretty obvious, but that we maybe haven't really touched on here is people who have been in default. A lot of these opportunities are not available to people who have been in default. I know that Fresh Start allows people to get on to save, but we're still looking at 25-year repayment for that. In that case that I mentioned, she had federal benefits offset. She was over the age of 65. She had a disability. And she had Parent Plus loans and loans of her own. So I just wanted to use that to kind of illustrate the ways that these categories do cross over into each other, and also that some things like defaulted loans with federal benefits offset are always indicative of pretty serious hardship.
Thank you, Lane. Kira.
And I just wanted to strongly support Lane's call that defaulted borrowers be added to this list. Repeatedly during the first session and this session, I've discussed ways that the department could provide relief now to defaulted borrowers using existing data or using the data that shows that these borrowers have been in default for a long time and are still not making progress on paying down their debts. And as Lane said, default in and of itself is an indicia of hardship.
Thank you, Kara. All right, if there's nothing else, I'm inclined to move on to our last question. All right, last question. What thresholds or standards should the department use for the items above to determine if a borrower is experiencing hardship? Just a reminder to our people watching, those that are going to be public commenters, please start thinking about logging on. What thresholds or standards should the department use for the items above to determine if a borrower is experiencing hardship? Questions, comments that can, and specifics, please, specifics for the department to be able to inform them on their next steps. All right, and I see that Jalil has come in. Please go ahead, Jalil.
I think, return to my earlier comment, I did scan through, and thank you, Ben, for directing me to the sheet. I see a major concern around how the department is going to move forward in defining what you call the distressed borrower or material hardship. I'm worried that there was a threshold used in the last rulemaking that said that a borrower making an hourly wage of about $15 basically doesn't have hardship. So what that means is that someone's still at this 225%, a person making $15.28, because they can, in theory, afford food, we then are using a claim that they don't have hardship, or since they're not behind on a bill, they don't have hardship. But the promise of student loan debt was not that you just get to live and be able to feed yourself. It was that you get to have a thriving a life, that you are able to have social mobility. So I think some of this is that we need to really come back to how the department is defining material hardship, which based on the last rulemaking, it was at 225%, because in theory, those people could still feed themselves. But there was no evidence that they, at least that I'm seeing, that they could still have savings accounts, that they could still contribute to retirement, that they could still save for college so that they didn't have to take on Parent Plus loans or prevent their children from taking on loans, that they could do other things that we define as having a thriving life, which is, again, was the promise of student debt. The promise of student debt wasn't take out a loan and then you can feed yourself so that you don't die. It was that you have a thriving life. And right now, the threshold, and at least in how material hardship was defined in the last rulemaking, brings the definition so narrow that really the only way we can understand relief is, well, if you can feed yourself, then you're fine. Even though we have so much evidence from both the Survey of Consumer Finance, from the qualitative research, that borrowers are struggling even when they can feed themselves. And even that's debatable still at $15.28. So I just think a part of this too is for the department to understand that we have evidence of how you defined material hardship in the last rulemaking, and it is really, I think, problematic. And when we think about racial justice, it is a grave injustice to have marked it at 225% when thinking about all we know about how our economy plays out along uneven gender and racial lines. So I just want to put that here, that we don't have to guess how you define hardship, because we do have evidence of how you defined it before. And I think it is a serious justice issue that I'm going to mark here for the record, because we should be doing more than
30 seconds remaining, Jalil.
We should be doing more than just saying these people can eat and pay bills. We should be defining it as the original promise. Student loans and education should contribute to a thriving life, not just a existing life.
Thank you, Jalil. The last question, thresholds or standards, specifics, please. Reminding you, if you have any proposals and specific, do so in red line to your FMCS facilitators, questions or comments in the chat. Specifics to this question to help inform the department. Anyone? Anything else the negotiators would like to add? Jessica, please.
Hi, sorry to take us back to this, but I just wanted to respond to something Tammy put in the chat, like all the way at the beginning of the session, as to the GE acknowledgement. I'm really concerned about how this would play out in reality, and I just want to think about it from the borrower's perspective. So it's been like almost 2 years since the GE rulemaking. But my recollection is that what would happen is that a borrower, if a program fails 1 year of certain metrics, then any borrower would be required to do an acknowledgement, understanding that the school has failed that metric, but may or may not be allowed to continue in the Title IV participation based on things that haven't even happened yet, things that are years into the future. And that essentially at that point, that acknowledgement, while it may or may not, I don't know what the department's planning, say that would give up the future ability to waive the loans, it would functionally for the secretary to apply waiver authority with respect to the loans for the program if that program were to lose Title IV eligibility under GE. I think whether or not you told the borrower that that's what's happening, that's what's effectively happening. And I think that would put a borrower in a very difficult position of having to decide whether to continue attendance in a school that may or may not lose eligibility for the program that they're in, or to give up some possibility and relief in the future if that happens. And I'm not sure. I think if the department wants to keep that in there, I'd really like to hear next time how it would play out from the borrower's perspective, nuts and bolts, because I have a lot of concerns about putting the borrower in essentially trying to make it an impossible choice. And Tammy, I understand what you say. We're using the word waive in two different ways here, and it is confusing, and I totally understand your comment. But I really do think that that's concerning, and I just want to put it up.
Thank you, Jessica. Yale.
Thanks, Jessica. And I apologize. I had missed Tammy's comment earlier, but I see it now. And I hear you on the technical nature of the term waiver, but I don't think there's any way around reading the regs, unless I'm really misreading the proposed regs, where subsection 3 says the borrower did not submit an acknowledgement, and that's a condition for debt relief under this provision. So it is in fact functioning as a waiver. And whether or not you call it a waiver, it is an impediment to relief. And I think what we're all saying and have said, I shouldn't say we're all, but those of us who have mentioned this, is it should not function as an impediment to relief given the purposes of this section, which are of course different than the statutory purposes and the regulatory purposes of the GE rule. So, I just want to second Jessica's point, but also maybe clarify that while I know I see what you mean with respect to the word waiver, the fact remains the same.
Thank you, Tammy.
Jessica, would it be possible for you to expand a little bit? We heard you say staying enrolled, and one of our questions is, do you have the same concern for prospective and current students? We just want to get clarification around what you're asking, and we're not understanding quite the timeline that you mentioned. You said something about 8 years. So would you circle back so that we can clearly understand exactly what we need to research and get back to you on, please? Thanks so much.
Sure. And again, it's been years since we all were in one of these Zooms. So I apologize if I'm misunderstanding or misremembering the purpose of this acknowledgement. But my understanding was that this acknowledgement would happen upon a program's failure of 1 year of metrics that would not automatically lead to a loss of Title IV eligibility. It would basically say, you're on notice that if things progress in a certain direction, the program may lose eligibility. But if things progress in a different direction, the program may not lose eligibility. And you're just here to know these two possibilities are in the future. And that essentially at that point, the borrower is basically required to acknowledge that they understand that that is a possibility for the future, and that this language would essentially mean that if things went poorly and that the program continued to go in that direction, that the borrower would lose entitlement to this relief. And so I agree with you. I'm not completely sure about the timing, and it's been years, and I apologize, but I think that I am concerned about both prospective and currently enrolled students, because I can't imagine what such an acknowledgement could possibly say that would make it clear to the borrower what they're giving up in a way that would be direct and fair and transparent and allow the borrower to make an informed choice. And I honestly am not sure that any borrower would sign an acknowledgement that would give up their entitlement to relief, but that entitlement to relief would only come years later. And then I just don't see how this plays out in practice. And I think if you want to keep it in, I would like an explanation from the department of exactly what that timeline is and exactly what the words are going to say and how this makes sense to borrowers, because I frankly don't see it. I can't really explain it.
Thank you so much for that clarification. Let us look into that and we can circle back at a different time. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. We are going to endeavor to take a break prior to public comment. Public comment is coming up at the top of the hour. Wisdom, anything specific to address to the last question that we're considering right now?
Yeah, to the last question around threshold or standards, I think it's important for us to really think through the promises that were made to borrowers, right? The minimum of $20,000 being canceled for those who are recipients of the Pell Grant, and Pell Grant being one of the indicators that was proposed as well. I think that the standard should just be that they are Pell Grant recipients. We know that 75% of HBCU graduates are Pell Grant recipients. I myself am a Pell Grant recipient. We represent members across this nation who are Pell Grant recipients, and recognizing that already being an indicator for the need or support to be in higher education. I think that if there has already been a standard that has been set for an equity lens, right, that the need to cancel student debt at a different rate for those who are Pell Grant recipients, that must be considered, that must be engaged as a minimum threshold for those who are to receive this potential waiver.
Thank you, Wisdom. Scott will be our last commenter prior to taking a break before public comment? Go ahead, Scott.
Sure, and my mind actually might be sort of well-timed with that then, so mine's more administrative in nature here. Our constituency is really focused on the role of providing technical, operational, and sort of legal feedback on specific proposals. So it would be really useful for Ed to provide, sort of revised regs language as soon as possible. And I can fully appreciate the challenge that both the department and the general counsel's office are under, given sort of the time constraints and all the things that are still open-ended, and especially because I think Ed has just received one actual proposal for language for the text so far, after all these conversations. But obviously the text is the thing here, right? That we need to react to, provide feedback on it. It's got to be robust, it's got to be clear, it's got to be detailed, and it's also got to be scoped so it doesn't conflict with or exceed the authority under the statute, which otherwise risks the entire package. And I think all of us will need plenty of time to look through that final text. So, getting that as soon as possible would be great. And I wonder maybe, Tammy, if you could sort of remind us all of sort of the timeline of when you need proposals in, and then also when the department anticipates being able to get through all that. Because again, I'm very empathetic to y'all's challenge to do all of this in such a short time, since we have so many outstanding items that we don't have language for yet.
Yes. Thank you so much, Scott. I would be happy to remind everybody. I will say, per our protocols, we guarantee that we will get reg text to you 1 week before in the advance of negotiations. If at all possible, we will do our best to circulate that before that period of time, but there are very many moving pieces and parts for us. So the best thing that you guys can do to help us is to get your proposals to us no later than Tuesday, the 14th. That will certainly help us. I think, expecting you to just in the middle of these negotiations, throw those proposals together and get those out in an official response to us is a little aggressive timeline. But we are giving you until Tuesday, the 14th. If you can get those to us, we will begin immediately working. The minute these negotiations are over, we start work on all of the deliverables that we need to have pulled together for you guys in advance of our next session. But I cannot guarantee that it will be before 1 week in advance of the negotiations. And, I hope that you guys respect that there's a lot that goes into us preparing these for you. And we really need all the time we can to make sure we get it right before we give it to you guys. But you have our word, we're doing the very best we can, and we'll do everything in our powers to get that to you as soon as possible.
Thank you, Tammy. And we are done with this section of the afternoon. We are going to be coming back at 3 o'clock Eastern for public comment. We're on break until then. Folks that are signed up for public comment, please start signing in. Thank you. Welcome back, folks. We are now at our public comment period. As yesterday, we have expanded it to 1 hour. A reminder to the folks that are in queue for or on the list for public comment, please get signed in as soon as possible. Please understand that you're identifying We're identifying you based on how you registered, so keep that in mind. You will have 3 minutes for public comment, and you will get a 30-second reminder. All right, who's first?
All right, I just admitted Nancy Altman, who is the president of Social Security Works.
Nancy, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Nancy. You will have, thank you for coming in. You'll have 3 minutes for public comment. You will be given a 30-second warning. Your time starts now.
Thank you so much. And as you said, my name is Nancy Altman. I'm president of Social Security Works. You know, most people think of student debt as an issue just concerning young people, but a substantial proportion of older people are struggling with student debt as well. In fact, the number of older Americans with student debt jumped 500% in just the last 2 decades. And as 10,000 baby boomers continue to turn 65 every single day, that number will continue to skyrocket. Despite the stereotype of wealthy seniors in gated communities, most seniors live close to poverty. They're just one shock away from falling into poverty. About 1 out of 3 seniors rely on Social Security for virtually all of their income, and those benefits are extremely modest, averaging just around $20,000 a year. And those with outstanding student debt are generally the poorest, with incomes well below the average. A disproportionate number are single Black women, who on average have the lowest income with the lowest Social Security, average benefits of around $14,000. As you know, student debt cannot easily be discharged in bankruptcy, despite great hardship. Senior borrowers are twice as likely to be in default. As a general matter, Social Security benefits are beyond the reach of creditors. Like other income held in trust, Social Security can't be garnished by financial institutions and other private creditors. But since 1996, when the law was changed to allow it, the federal government can garnish Social Security benefits, and it does. The number of retirees and people with disabilities who have a part of their modest Social Security checks taken to pay off student loans, often decades old, has more than tripled. And that's the fate of today's young people if you do not provide relief. The nation is facing a retirement income crisis. As important as Social Security is to today's beneficiaries, it will be even more important to those who follow. You can help alleviate that crisis by doing all within your power to alleviate the ongoing student debt crisis, which affects every generation.
30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. I've just concluded. Okay.
Thank you, Nancy. Who's next?
All right, I just admitted Ernest Oswego, who is here representing the Lumina Foundation.
Ernest, welcome. This is your opportunity to make a public comment to the negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning. Your time starts now.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I want to thank the Department of Education and the committee for hosting this comment period. My name is Ernest Oswego. I'm a strategy officer at Lumina Foundation, a private foundation committed to making opportunities for learning beyond high school available to all. We applaud the administration's work in providing relief to student loan borrowers so far, and we wish to share 2 key considerations for the current rulemaking effort. First, we support the department's proposal to reduce loan balances of borrowers who have seen their debts grow over time due to negative amortization. This is especially important for addressing the racial equity implications of student loan debt. Research has shown that this problem is acutely harmful for borrowers of color. For example, one report found that most Black borrowers owe more on their loans than they originally borrowed more than a decade after entering repayment. The department has asked whether other criteria should be added to limit this type of relief. In response, we echo the sentiments of negotiators. A growing balance is an indication that a borrower is struggling to manage their loans. Borrowers often see their loan balances grow because they enter deferments or forbearance to get through a period of hardship. In other cases, Borrowers on income-driven repayment plans see their balances grow because their incomes are low, their balances are high, or both. Borrowers in these circumstances need and deserve relief. And we urge you to avoid placing any undue limitations on that relief. Secondly, we encourage the department to consider providing relief to student loan borrowers who did not earn a degree. Students balancing work, caregiving, and financial responsibilities are more likely to leave college without a credential than their peers. Many of these students borrow to pay for college, and when they can't complete, they're often left worse off than when they first enrolled. Their loans make it harder to re-enroll in college and earn a credential, and not having a credential limits their access to good-paying jobs that would otherwise help them pay down their debt. This is a perennial problem, only growing in scope. The latest National Student Clearinghouse data reports that 40 million plus Americans attended some college but left with no credential. Furthermore, recent Department of Justice guidance on bankruptcy claims recognizes that borrowers who take out loans for a degree that they don't complete are unlikely to see their financial circumstances improve over time. In other words, government has already associated not having the credential with financial hardship.
30 seconds remaining.
Thank you, but that reality is largely unaddressed by the existing student loan system. The administration has a moral and economic imperative to address burdensome student debt and is right to consider bold, flexible, expansive, and creative strategies to do so in this rulemaking. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ernest. Who do we have next?
All right, I just admitted Christina Fields, who is here representing herself.
Christina, can you, no, she's still connecting to audio.
Still trying to connect to audio.
Christina, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic, I can hear you as well. This is your opportunity to give a public comment to the negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning. Your time starts now.
Okay, thank you. My name is Christina Fields. I'm a resident of Rochester, New York, in one of the highest poverty neighborhoods in the United States. In 2021, I was stuck living with the alcoholic, abusive father of my infant daughter, and I was convinced I couldn't financially make my life work on my own. I'd been hiding from my student loans for about a decade, working low-wage jobs, barely able to pay my bills. When the student loan forgiveness program was announced, I applied, was approved, and relied on that approval to change my life. I got approved for a mortgage based partly on that loan forgiveness, found a cheap house in a bad neighborhood, bought it, left my abusive ex, took my infant daughter, and moved on to reclaim my life. With the looming threat of my student loans returning, I'm not sure I'll be able to make my financial life work. I received no child support, and the reality of owning, heating, and maintaining a 100-year-old home is really starting to sink in. I'm asking that you please honor the promise made to forgive federal student loans for those like me already approved. It would make a significant difference in my ability to live how I choose, stay off of public assistance, and realize the American dream. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Folks that are in the queue or on the list, please take this opportunity to sign on as soon as possible. Thank you. Who do we have next, Brady?
All right, I just admitted Sabrina Calazans, who is the Managing Director for the Student Debt Crisis Center.
Thank you. Sabrina, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. Fantastic. This is your opportunity to make a public comment to the negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning period. Your time starts now.
Okay. Hello, my name is Sabrina Calazans, and I'm the Managing Director at the Student Debt Crisis Center. SDCC is a nonprofit organization with about 2 million supporters nationwide, and they work to amplify borrower voices and needs to end the student debt crisis once and for all. I'm a student loan borrower, and I have about $30,000 in student loan debt. It wasn't until I started working in this space and heard borrower stories that I realized how within households and families, there are often multiple generations impacted by student debt. My own family is an example of that. My sister has about $23,000 in student debt, and my dad has about $11,000 in Parent Plus loans. In many cases, multiple individuals have to take on debt to get their loved ones into college. I graduated in 2019 and my sister in May of this year. President Biden's original plan of canceling up to $10,000 or $20,000 per borrower would have been life-changing for my family. Both my sister and I were Pell Grant recipients, and each of us would have had $20,000 canceled each. She would have had almost all of her debt canceled, and I would have had 2/3 of mine wiped away. My dad's Parent Plus loan also would have been fully canceled. The joy that we felt following the president's announcement and the submission of our applications for debt cancellation quickly turned into fear and frustration a few months later, following the injunction and the terrible decision made by the Supreme Court. So many families like mine hoped and dreamed of a reality where we no longer had student debt or where the burden would be less. And as a first-generation American and college graduate, the plan to cancel student debt would have made a huge difference in my household, where there is no generational wealth and where every single paycheck matters to get us to the next week. Unfortunately, my story is not unique. Last month, I also made my first student loan payment, and along the way, I was placed into an administrative forbearance without ever being told why, and received confusing, conflicting information about auto debit that left me uncertain about whether I had successfully made a payment or not. If it hasn't been easy for me, and it's my job to help others navigate the system and the existing programs, then what hope is there for the folks who don't work with experts, who don't understand the complex language, who don't have easy access to the internet or who are not tech savvy, and who have been failed by their servicers time and time again? We need to do better, and we need to cancel student debt. Broad-based student debt cancellation is necessary for millions of Americans, but especially for the first-generation
30
students,
seconds.
women, low-income folks, and communities of color that are all disproportionately impacted by this debt. Cancellation could result in the start of families and businesses, basic needs being met, or simply removing millions from this harmful system. We urge you to consider debt cancellation for all student loan borrowers. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Brady, who do we have next?
All right, I just admitted Satra Taylor, who's here representing herself.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Satra, yes, I can hear you and I can see you now. Thank you. This is your opportunity to make public comment to the negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning. Your time starts now.
Awesome. Good afternoon. I am Satra D. Taylor, and I come to you all today as a current doctoral student at the University of Maryland, College Park. I believe in the power of education so much that I decided to get a terminal degree studying the subject matter. Yet as of lately, I have grown deeply disappointed in how the United States higher education system has moved further and further away from former President Lyndon B. Johnson's intent when signing the Higher Education Act of 1965, which was so that no student will be denied a chance to participate in higher education due to financial limitations or socioeconomic status, but would instead know the path of knowledge was open to all that had the determination to walk it. The current gatekeeping occurring within the United States higher education system by the wealthy was never the intent. Yet here we are requiring public servants and citizens to take time out of their demanding and taxing lives to support and stand firm in their belief in debt cancellation. When is enough enough? When will the stories, the data, or the hardship illustrate a narrative enough for the liking of those in power to cancel student loan debt? Listen to us when we say canceling up to $50,000 in student loan debt will significantly reduce the racial wealth gap and lift the burden of this student debt crisis for millions. Listen to us when we say the original plan to cancel student debt relief in the amounts of $10,000 and $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients should be the start, not the ceiling. Listen to us when we say, while we welcome the Saving on Valuable Education Repayment Plan, it is not the end all be all. There are graduate borrowers, hello, Parent Plus borrowers, borrowers who did not complete their program, borrowers receiving public assistance, incarcerated borrowers, and more still facing hardships with the cards that the powers that be dealt. It's time to shuffle the deck of cards. I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to my comment as you all work diligently to establish a rule related to the modification, waiver, or compromise of federal student loans. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Satra. A reminder to those that are on the list, please get signed in sooner than later. Brady, who do we have next?
All right, I just submitted Elizabeth Turner. It looks like her video doesn't work, but I believe her audio does.
Hi, can you hear me?
Elizabeth, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Thank you for coming in for public comment to the negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning. Your time begins now.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Elizabeth Turner. Here's my story. I applied and was approved for student loan debt forgiveness in the fall of 2022. This relieved a huge financial burden for me by completely eliminating my student debt. Soon after I was approved, my father fell ill and he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the winter of 2022. He needed to undergo surgery and chemotherapy right away, and this put a huge strain on my family, not only financially, but practically as well. Because my mother was already stretched too thin as the primary caregiver for her elderly mother who had Alzheimer's. I made the difficult decision to quit my full-time job in favor of a part-time job with more flexible hours, which would allow me to step in as a secondary caregiver as needed. I knew that this was risky because I would be taking a significant pay cut and would no longer be able to put money into savings. However, I felt comfortable doing so because I knew that I did not have to pay back my student loans. I was completely unaware at the time that the constitutionality of Biden's debt relief program was being ruled upon by the Supreme Court. And like many other Americans, I was blindsided by the Supreme Court's decision to overturn debt relief. I began applying for jobs immediately and even applied for an income-based repayment plan. But after applying to over 100 jobs, I have been unable to find secondary employment and have no backup plan in the case that my income-based repayment plan application is denied. I am college educated, I work hard, I support my family, I donate to charity when I can, and I volunteer for several local nonprofits. I am a good person. I did not find myself in this situation because I am lazy or stupid. I simply made the difficult decision to prioritize my family's well-being over my own financial security. And my biggest mistake was to trust that the government would provide a safety net for people in need. I am ashamed to live in a country where wealth is prioritized over the health, safety, and livelihoods of its citizens. The fundamental truth is that we live in a country where good people like me have to choose what's more important: spending time with a dying loved one or being able to afford both rent and food. Student debt relief was a lifeline for those of us who are drowning, and that is why I'm sharing my story and begging those in power to fulfill their promise to the American people. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Brady, who do we have next?
I just admitted Jonathan Macedo, who's here representing himself.
Hey, how you doing?
Jonathan, hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming in to comment to the negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning.
Okay.
Your time begins now.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Macedo, and I wanted to thank everyone here. I'm here because I wanted to propose a rule that caps the amount of profit the government can make on each individual student who makes payments under an IBR plan. I graduated from BU in 2007 with a finance degree, which I attended on almost a full ride. I then went to UM's law school in 2010, financed mostly by Grad Plus loans. I'm the first of my family to get a bachelor's degree and first for grad school. I'm here because I borrowed about $120,000 from school. As of today, I've repaid about $150,000 to $170,000. But despite paying more than what I borrowed, I still owe $286,000, and I'm more than double my principal, and I'm in the top 1% of student debt borrowers. Every time I tell people what happened, the knee-jerk reaction, that's unfair, I should tell someone. I've tried. Every time I talk to Navient or Advantage, they always say that interest set by Congress, there's nothing that they can really do. The biggest mistake for me is that in 2007, when I took on the debt, I thought I could easily swing the debt because I saw what the schools were posting as expected pay. What I didn't project was the Great Recession. Now it changed everything, changed the world midway through school. It hurt my job prospects, and it really kind of impacted my job, what I could make. What ended up happening.
Enjoy. Don't get lost.
What ended up happening is that grade graduation, it took about 5 to 6 years to be able to afford what I thought I was going to be able to make right out of law school. My debt ended up ballooning, and the interest expense turned into about $2,400 a month. That's interest expense, not interest in principal. So what's ended up happening ever since then is I've been able to pay the interest, maybe pay a little bit of principal, but every time something happens, I take 10 steps back and I get further indebted to the government. My issue is I wasn't really available. The SAVE programs weren't available. I didn't come from generational wealth, and I'd not had been in this predicament if I could have just found work during the Great Recession. So what I wanted to propose is to kind of make a solution for some of these people. I know I'm not the only one that the government's made money off of. It's just to have the Department of Ed release lists of where they've made profit off of people, and for those people to get targeted for hardship relief, or something either based on their income or based how much money the government has made off of them. And that was it. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Brady, who do we have next?
I just admitted Tammy McCarthy, who's speaking on behalf of herself.
Thank you. Tammy, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Let me get my video going here.
Sure.
There we go.
Thank you, Tammy. Hello. Thank you for coming for public comment directly to the negotiators. You'll have a 3-minute period with a 30-second warning. Your time begins now.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys giving me the time to speak. I understand that this meeting is not specifically about public service loan forgiveness or IDR forgiveness, but I think it's important because many people have been left behind. I am very thankful that I received my public service loan forgiveness last February, but I'm continuing to advocate for others who have not yet received student loan forgiveness. For example, people with school Chapter 13 bankruptcy and default forbearances have been left out of the hold harmless provision of PSLF and IDR waivers. Please allow borrowers to retroactively buy back this time. I also know people who have loans that were left with a balance after part of their loans were forgiven due to servicer delays. Please ensure that these borrowers with hanging loans are also given student loan forgiveness. Lastly, please expedite the processing of loan forgiveness for borrowers with spousal joint consolidation loans. It has been over 1 year since the law allowing borrowers to separate their joint consolidation loans was passed. According to the Education Department, the law cannot be implemented before late 2024. Meanwhile, these loans continue to accrue interest and impact people's credit scores. This is unfair and needs to be fixed. Thank you so much for your time and consideration to help grant student loan forgiveness to more borrowers. I know in my case it was very much life-changing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tammy.
And that's the end for me. I appreciate it. You guys have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you. Brady, who do we have next?
Next up, we have Dawn Holland, who's here on behalf of herself.
Hello, Dawn.
Hi.
This
Good
is your
afternoon.
opportunity. Good afternoon. This is your opportunity to make public comment directly to the negotiators. You'll have a 3-minute period with a 30-second warning. Your time begins now.
Okay, sounds good. My comments is in reference to veterans. As the mother, daughter, sister, and aunt of active U.S. service members and veterans, I wanted to advise on the possibility of loan forgiveness assistance for veterans who have served beyond 4 years, have been honorably discharged, but have not found a job with a salary that can provide enough funds to pay for their student loans. Veterans give up so much for our country and for our families that their student loans should be forgiven, or the PLSF waiver that expired on October 31st, 2022 should be reinstated, extended for a longer period of time, or become a permanent solution for our veterans. The other thought that I wanted to present is that also as a caregiver of a veteran, which is my parents, monies that would originally go to student loans to pay back those student loans, a lot of times those funds have to go to the care of not only our elderly parents, but for those veterans that are unfortunately in a situation that they need that assistance, the financial assistance. So those are the things that I wanted to bring forth when we're talking about, student loan forgiveness, is that always the circumstances may not be the individual's situation that they can't pay. It's come to certain circumstances where we are looking for the care of family members or veterans where those monies to go to make sure that those veterans and those elderly folks are getting their needs taken care of. So that's the comment that I wanted to present.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you.
And thank you for your family service.
Thank you. Hard thing, but we got to do it.
Thank you. Brady, who do we have next?
I just admitted Elizabeth Briere, who's here speaking on behalf of herself.
Elizabeth, welcome to public comment directly to the negotiators. You have a 3-minute
Thank you.
section with 30-second warning.
Hard thing, but we got to do it.
Thank you. Your time begins now. Brady, who do we have next?
Elizabeth, if you just wouldn't mind canceling off the live stream, because there's going to be a bit of an echo. But we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. It's on.
Okay. And your time begins now, Elizabeth.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth, and I appreciate your allowing me to share my thoughts on potential improvements for individuals with bankruptcy student loans and prior economic hardships not otherwise addressed by the current student loan system. Specifically, I'd like to focus on improvements for PSLF individuals with a history of bankruptcy. To illuminate the area of concern, I will share a brief history of my journey with bankruptcy, student loans, the challenges with the current rules disallowing forgiveness, and how individuals like me have slipped through the cracks of the current forgiveness system. In 2011, I experienced an economic hardship and needed to declare Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Under this ruling, I was told my monthly payments to my trustee would include and satisfy my student loan payments. As a condition of my bankruptcy repayment program, I was directed to pay these loans to the trustee, not the student loan servicer. Under this guidance, I made 60 prorated student loan payments to my trustee over the 5 years. These payments should qualify under the PSLF limited waiver rules. To quote studentaid.gov PSLF limited waiver website, periods of repayment where payments were late or for less than the amount due also count. Technically, I met the requirement less than the amount due since I paid a prorated amount. I asked for reconsideration of the bankruptcy rules for the limited waiver applicants where student loan payments were made during Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Next, I looked into the IDR one-time account adjustment because of the forbearance rule. I was forced into forbearance during the bankruptcy, even though I was technically paying on these loans. According to the IDR rules, bankruptcy forbearance does not count for this adjustment. Lastly, I researched the option to buy back some of these months in bankruptcy for PSLF, even though I already paid a prorated amount as noted before. However, I am also denied forgiveness through buyback because these months are labeled bankruptcy forbearance, and this forgiveness option excludes bankruptcy buyback. As you can see, the class of borrowers like me are left with no options by the system and are denied forgiveness after multiple attempts with different programs. Instead of defaulting or deferring, many of us tried to do the right thing with the guidance we were given. So I'm not here requesting a brand new proposal. I'm asking for minor revisions to the current program.
30 seconds remaining.
So those who went through Chapter 13 bankruptcy have options too, like the limited waiver or the other options mentioned earlier. I appreciate your time and hope you will consider helping individuals like me. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Just
Brady, who do we have next?
Jeremy Bellinger, who's here representing himself.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Brady. Jeremy, can you hear me?
Sorry, I can. Can you hear me?
I can, loud and clear. Jeremy, this is your opportunity to make public comment directly to the negotiators. You will have 3 minutes and a 30-second warning. Your time begins now.
Okay. Well, my comment is very brief. I was just curious if the department had considered definitions for the phrase totally, I think it's totally and permanently disabled for purposes of student loan forgiveness. I know there's one section related to being determined unemployed by the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs, but it seems like there could be a broader definition. I am a veteran. I have an 80% disability. Luckily, I do have a job, but there are times in which it can be stressful, particularly for other veterans. So I just wanted to see if the department had considered any expansion of that definition to include possibly other veterans or other forms of disability.
Jeremy, this is an opportunity for comment. There's not a question and answer period.
Yeah, okay. I guess that would be my comment is that whether, or I'm trying to think how to phrase that then. I would comment that I think the department should look at expanding that definition so it's not so narrow.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add at this point?
Nope, that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
Should I just leave
Brady, who do we have next?
All right, I just submitted Terry Dodd, who's here speaking on behalf of himself.
Thank you, Brady. Terry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I certainly can. Terry, this is your opportunity to make a public comment to the negotiators. You will have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning, and your time begins right now.
Okay, well, I'm Terry Dodd. I'm 42 years old. I have about a little over $13,000 in student loans, and I still have maybe about another 9 years to pay the student loans, and I just want some kind of relief, some kind of break, because I mean, I've been paying these student loans since back in 2006, and it's just kind of ridiculous how I try to, balance my work life and I guess you could say my work life and my personal life, and I just pretty much try to make ends meet. And it just seemed like, how can I put this? I just want to live a student loan debt-free life, but it just seemed like I can't. Because I've been going through all kinds of changes with the student loan providers and everything. I just wish Congress would just, get it together, cut the borrowers a break of some kind, instead of bickering and fighting, thinking it's going to, how can I put this? It's going to put a dent in their wallet, because the student loan borrowers are also the taxpayers too. So think about the student loan borrowers, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that's going through this, because eventually I want to get married and I just don't want this hanging over my head. And I just wish there was some kind of magic wand. I just wish to just make these student loans go away, but it just seems like I can. And I mean, eventually I want to go back to school, but I'm not going to sign up for more student loans, because by the time I get done paying the current student loans I get, I'm going to have some more student loans. And by the time I get done paying the other student loans, I won't be old as my grandparents. And they're like 80 years old, 80, 81 years old. So when I do go back to school, I'm going to wind up just saving up money. I'm just going to wind up paying out of pocket.
30 seconds remaining.
Because this is just completely ridiculous, and it just seemed like nobody realized how big of a problem this was till recently. So I just hope to God that Congress make some kind of effort to get some kind of resolution passed as far as these student loans go. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Brady, who do we have next?
All right, I just submitted Matthew Ray, who is here speaking on behalf of students defrauded by the University of Phoenix.
Okay, thank you, Brady. Matthew, I see that you're muted. Can you hear me? Matthew, can you hear me?
If you want, I can work with him during the next speaker, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right, I will admit John Acuros, who's here representing himself.
Okay. Matthew, I think Brady's going to help you with that. John, can you hear me?
Brady, has John been admitted?
Yeah, it looks like, so I admitted him, but he's still in the waiting room, so he needs to, if you can hear this, accept the login once you get the Zoom message that you're getting admitted. Let me admit our next speaker while I work with John and Matthew.
Thank
so
you,
our
Brady.
next speaker is Lynn Polite, who's here representing the organization Do Us Part, which is a grassroots organization regarding spousal consolidation.
Okay, thank you. Lynn, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I think you're going to have to turn your audio off for the public sector section.
Oh, gotcha.
We're getting a little feedback.
Sure.
Okay, there we go. Lynn, are you still there?
Yes, yes, I am.
Okay, you disappeared. All right.
Oh, hang on.
Lynn.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're all good. Lynn?
Yes.
Okay, Lynn, this is your opportunity to make a public comment to the negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes and a 30-second warning. Your time begins now.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name's Lynn Pollitt, and I'm part of another group with hardship that hasn't been identified today, those of us with joint consolidated loans. I have a consolidated loan with my ex-husband, and even though the loan program ended in 2006, the hardship to those of us has not ended, and we experience those hardships in every aspect of our life. I was a single mother of 2 when I went back to school, seeking a way out of poverty. I worked 3 jobs while going to school full-time, received Pell Grants, graduated summa cum laude as the first college graduate in my family. I ended college with $32,000 in my original school loans, and I have been paying for 26 years, and I have paid over $68,000, and yet now I still owe $50,000. I did remarry. In 2002, Nelnet contacted us about consolidating our loans, but nothing was mentioned that we would not be able to separate those loans in the event of a divorce. And we did eventually divorce. After our divorce, I had to take out 3 separate protection orders against him. He harassed, stalked, and threatened to kill me. He would do just enough to intimidate me, but not so much that he would be arrested. And the irony is that I was the director of the sexual assault and domestic violence program in our community. I ended up having to move out of state to get away from him, leaving my children and grandchildren. My marriage may have ended, but being tethered to an abusive man through these student loans has not ended. I'm now 70 years old on Medicare. I have dedicated over 50 years of my life to public service and nonprofit work. I finally retired this past May as a charter school principal. I've moved back to be closer to my family as I have cancer again for the 2nd time in the last 4 years. I barely make ends meet between Social Security and my pension, and my student loan payments are 25% of my net income. Now, not only am I living with cancer, because I've moved back, I'm now living with the fear that this man will discover through our joint Nelnet account that I've moved back and he will have my address again. Even though the law was passed to allow us to separate our loans, we still need a mechanism to do so. Then we can consolidate into direct loans and have equal access to relief.
30 seconds remaining.
At the minimum we need, and I'm asking, is for administrative forbearance that is easily obtained, non-capitalizing, no interest, while waiting for the ED process to separate our loans. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Lynn. Brady, who do we have next?
I believe Matthew is ready. If he wants to come off of mute. Perfect.
Great. Matthew, can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Fantastic. This is your opportunity for public comment. You have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning. Your time begins now.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. Today, I would like to speak on behalf of not just myself, but also hundreds, if not tens of thousands of students at University of Phoenix who have probably gone through the same exact thing, which was that back in, starting from early 2000 all the way up to as recently, we wanted to find a way to be able to get education because we were working, 9-to-5 jobs. We have other obligations that prevented us from being able to work our lives into the schedules of typical college schedules. So today I am speaking in favor of group discharges on University of Phoenix loans, as well as all other for-profit colleges or universities that have defrauded student borrowers through the deceptive practices, whether if it's through advertising or different tactics to try to have everybody enroll with high dollar, tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt that is practically going to be impossible to pay back once even after graduation and even after graduation, and where these degrees or certificates that we studied for are not accepted by on the wide range with employers. So when we also think about this, this also has impacts that where individuals are going homeless. They're not able to get basic necessities such as keeping a roof over their head, purchasing a home, or even purchasing a vehicle that is reliable and dependable for them to continue to even just go to work and working in a job. I myself have experienced where my bachelor's degree that I obtained from University of Phoenix is not accepted. I have been passed up on many job opportunities that I felt that I would have qualified for had I gone to a typical state university and obtained the same degree. I've also been able to, thankfully, get some type of certifications through different entities just to help me with being able to keep my job and trying to grow that way. I just think that group discharging is the only way to go. If we already have proof that these 30 seconds remaining. Universities, thank you. If we already have a lot of proof and the Department of Education is aware of them or aware of that proof, I think that group discharges should be made. Because I think it's just wasting everyone's time to go case by case from each student when all the students are coming with the same type of evidence. I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew.
I just admitted Sabrina Barger-Turner, who is here speaking on behalf of her organization, Homeless and Human.
Okay, thank you. Sabrina, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Welcome to the public comment before the negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning. Your time begins now.
Good afternoon, fellow citizens. I speak today to advocate for student loan debt relief as a crucial step towards addressing the homelessness crisis and preventing individuals from falling into its grasp. Student loan debt is a major impediment to stability or wellness of any kind, including housing stability, job stability, mental and physical wellness, financial stability, and beyond. By working with nonprofits, religious organizations, schools, and other similar entities to identify people living homeless or on the verge of homelessness, would benefit from student loan debt relief, we can improve the lives of an unknown number of people in our nation. Student loan debt is an overwhelming burden for millions of Americans, negatively impacting credit scores and creating significant barriers to housing. It is the second largest source of household debt in the United States. As borrowers struggle to meet their monthly payments, their credit scores suffer, making it difficult to secure housing. Also, a high debt-to-income ratio resulting from student loan debt can lead to automatic disqualification or higher security deposits. As such, individuals with poor credit scores due to student loan debt may be limited to substandard housing options or forced into unstable living arrangements such as temporary shelters, couch surfing, garages, hotels, barns, vehicles, tents, and the streets. These circumstances perpetuate the cycle of homelessness and hinder individuals' abilities to regain stability. These individuals often face difficult choices regarding their limited financial resources. A report by the National Alliance to End Homelessness highlights that individuals with student loan debt are more likely to prioritize loan payments over other essential needs such as housing, healthcare, or food. This prioritization perpetuates the cycle of homelessness as individuals struggle to meet both their basic needs and loan obligations. Furthermore, student loan debt disproportionately affects individuals from low-income backgrounds and communities who also experience a much higher level of homelessness and poverty. These individuals often have fewer financial resources to repay their loans, leading to a heavier debt burden and higher risk of default. Relieving this debt can help alleviate the financial strain and provide a more level playing field for these individuals. It is our duty to support policies that alleviate the financial burdens of our most vulnerable citizens and create pathways towards a brighter future for all. Uplifting one of us uplifts all of us. In conclusion, addressing student loan debt is crucial for tackling the homelessness crisis. By providing relief, we can rebuild credit scores, remove barriers to housing, and empower individuals to regain stability and show up for themselves, their families, and their communities in meaningful ways. Student loan debt relief for people experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness is a critical next step to creating a more equitable and prosperous society for us all.
Thank you, Sabrina.
I just admitted Courtney Berry, who's here speaking on behalf of herself.
Thank you, Brady. Courtney, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Thank you. I sure can. This is your opportunity to give public comment directly to the negotiators here today. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning, and your time begins right now.
Hi, so I'm here to talk about to request some group discharges for the borrower's defense, especially for the post-class. There's been several instances of issues where the school that I attended, specifically the Chicago school, has been deceptive for students, and I think to write that it would be appropriate to kind of do a group discharge as there's amount of evidence that had been submitted, and I know there are others in that same boat, and that to have that group discharge, I think personally would really change a lot for me, and speak of financially, because it's been a very large debt that I've accrued, and that is continuing to accrue, kind of as it's trying, not even attempting to be paid off, but it's slowly being kind of, paid down. But I think it's just with the amount of applications that I know that I've spoken with others who have gone to the Chicago school who have also applied, it would just seem timely and appropriate to do a group discharge if the school was found fraudulent.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Who do we have next?
All right, I just admitted Charles Cobble, who's here representing himself.
Charles, can you, oh, you're still connecting.
There we go, you should go hear you now.
Charles, can you hear me?
I can.
Fantastic. This is your opportunity, welcome, and this is your opportunity to make a public comment directly to the negotiators here today. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning, and your time begins right now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charles Cobble. I am a disabled Army veteran, licensed clinical social worker, member of Disabled American Veterans, and the National Association of Social Workers. I am also a student loan borrower, and I just want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to my comment as you all work diligently to establish a rule related to the modifications, waivers, or compromise of federal student loans. I wanted to tell you my story. I borrowed $122,000 to finance my undergraduate, but mostly my graduate education, which is required to be an LCSW or licensed clinical social worker. And despite 9 years of on-time payments, often working multiple jobs to make my payment on time, I now owe over $170,000. Upon completion of my degrees, I started my student loan repayment journey with Nelnet as my service provider and enrolled in an income-based repayment plan. Then, after 3 years of sending verification forms of my public service, employment, and income, I learned that Nelnet could not administer public service loan forgiveness, and I would have to transition my loans to FedLoan. This information was not freely offered by the Department of Education, Nelnet at the time I entered repayment, but only after I made inquiries to Nelnet regarding my qualifying payment count was this information revealed. The transition to FedLoan, to say the least, was cumbersome, and many of the qualifying payments I had made with Nelnet were lost and required me filing several requests for audits and providing copies of my payment history. This process was never completed by FedLoan. In July of 2022, my loans changed servicers to Mohila, and as this transition finally had my payment count in alignment with my payment history, I had hoped for better customer service. In August of 2023, as the pandemic payment pause was coming to an end, I logged into Mohila, ensured my contact information was current, and enrolled in auto pay with my first payment scheduled in October, as instructed by the government. Then, as I was expecting my first payment to resume, I received a notice that I had been placed on an administrative forbearance by Mohila with no explanation as to why or what implications this had on my loans.
30 seconds remaining.
I have tried multiple times to contact Mohila with no success. Even the VA has not been able to help me navigate these numerous hurdles. And as a first-generation college student from a blue-collar family, I have worked my way through my education, but still have accumulated substantial debt. I appreciate any and all assistance you can provide to make education possible and accessible for more people like me and the many others in this country trying to better themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you for your service. Brady, who do we have next?
We had John briefly, but I don't know if he was able to connect to audio. I can keep working with him while we hear from our next speaker, who's Patrick Donahue, who's here speaking on behalf of student loan justice.
Patrick, can you hear me? Oh, out the gun. Patrick, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic.
How's my sound?
You sound great.
Okay.
This is your opportunity to make a public comment before the negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning, and your time begins right now.
Very good. Thank you. Good afternoon. There seems to be a cynical and uninformed thought on the street and even in the halls of Congress that a loan is a loan, and borrowers, if they agree to terms, are therefore responsible and need to repay their loans. Conversely, we could say that the government is also responsible for providing a fair and equitable method to finance higher education. So thank you for this opportunity to address the group. To me, student loans are neither loans nor are they for students. They are grants to the universities and states passed through the students' hands, hyperinflated by capitalized interest, weaponized by removal of bankruptcy protections, and then demanded back by the government. I see two basic differences that I feel have not been adequately addressed. From day one, the FAFSA. Almost anybody can get a student loan, whether they are truly qualified or not. The FAFSA asks for income and assets, but does not inquire about existing debt as other loan agencies would. It merely checks for adverse credit history. How else would I be denied a $3,000 credit card by the credit union, but be granted almost $90,000 in Parent Plus loans over the years for 4 kids who we have put through college? Secondly, we know it is basically impossible to include these loans in legitimate bankruptcy proceedings without proving to the Department of Education and the ECMC that it would cause undue hardship. Such requests are routinely denied. Understandably, Uncle Sam wants to protect his loans and taxpayer monies, but he has to play by the rules. And as I imagine most people here know, the student loans are the only loans subject to these restrictions. We can say this undue hardship clause is in violation of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, authorizing uniform bankruptcy laws. In addition, borrowers must contend with the poor performance and unreliability of student loan services, and until recently, the lack of oversight on loan services. Then, of course, comes the bureaucratic nightmare of income-driven repayment plans and public service loan forgiveness plans. With the recent policy change, interest is no longer capitalized in the SAVE program if payments are on time and current. While this is a current and welcome development, it is still conditional and slanted in favor of the government. If the department truly wished to get to the root of the problem, it might recommend that the undue hardship clause be repealed. This would stop lending with impunity. Ending enforcement of undue hardship is also an option. As laws lose strength, they no longer remain enforceable. The department should step away from the process and let bankruptcy courts decide on their own, as they are charged to do. I believe if you do not vet on the front end, you have no standing to make judgments on the back end. This is a backwards and inside-out way of doing business. Unfortunately, the current policies still discourage rather than encourage getting or furthering an education. As we know, there's still more work to do, and a fundamental shift is necessary.
3 minutes.
As long as the system exists, the problem persists. Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
John, can you hear me?
We admitted John.
Okay, great. And this looks like it's probably the last one.
Yeah, unfortunately, his audio is not connected.
John, can you hear us?
Nah, he's not going to be able to. It looks like his devices.
Brady, let's go ahead and let in Joanne. We only have 2 more that are signed in, Joanne and Lorraine.
Okay.
Are we going to do both?
I would say yes, if that's okay with everyone.
Okay. All right.
All right. I'm going to keep trying to work with John offline, but in the meantime, I've admitted Joanne Mercedes, who's here representing herself.
Hello?
John.
There we go.
Hey, I'm here.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, well.
Hello.
Hi.
Hold on, Joanne. We'll get to you next, but I think we're
Joanne,
going
yeah.
over to John.
We're trying to navigate some technical issues. John, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, finally, John, welcome. This is your opportunity for public comment before the negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning, and your time begins right now.
Hi, I was wondering if there's hardship programs for our universities to apply for, because I felt like I was prisoner of a hardship at UC Berkeley, and UC Berkeley put my name on the internet from 2008 to 2011. And if you see John, call the police. The police are expecting the call. And so my name was put on there in a derogatory way, and I didn't find out until 2011. And apparently, I tried to notify the university, but the person I contacted at the media department said that that they wouldn't be able to help me, and I left. And she ended up calling the police, like the website said to do. It was a UC Berkeley social media post on a Berkeley website, sponsored by the university. So I ended up going to jail for 2 weeks, and I was very compliant, and they treated me with a vial. They called it a vaccine, but it was an experimental drug at the facility, a medical facility at Santa Rita Jail. And they said that I was a flight risk, They told me that they were going to inject this into my arm, which they did. The orange vial said mRNA, and all the mRNA that I worked with at UC Berkeley in the laboratories have always been supervised by a doctor. It was a very dirty environment in this medical facility. There was no doctor. So I was just wondering about hardships that schools like UC Berkeley have gone through. Very dehumanizing, and I feel like people who've been this dehumanized don't really have hardships. Hardships are ups and downs, more so the downs, and trying to survive.
30 seconds remaining.
Yeah, trying to survive isn't much of a hardship. I feel like it's more like I got kicked off the ship. I wasn't allowed on campus. They put a stay away order on the UC Berkeley campus. I didn't have the resources to graduate. Couldn't benefit from my simultaneous degree. I had to drop out of my simultaneous degree. I was wanting to be a doctor in sociology, so I only got half of my degree program finished. And I wanted to buy Bitcoin in 2010, and Social Security wouldn't let me. So I had ability to save.
Your time is up. Thank you for your comment.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you.
We did admit Joanne, and she is on if she wants to.
Okay.
You.
Joanne.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you. All right, Joanne, thank you for being here to make a public comment before the negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes and a 30-second warning. Your time begins right now.
Thank you. Thank you to the Department of Education and the negotiators for dedicating their time improving the student loan system. A time we feel investing in ourselves and trying to become useful members of society is a death sentence. My hope is that this new rulemaking committee addresses the issues that were still prevalent and solutions become evident and help millions of us. I know this rulemaking committee is addressing broader problems in IDR, PSLS are not being addressed, but many of us went through a rulemaking committee as well and still have issues that have not been resolved. In my case, despite having more than 14 years as a public servant, the Department of Education says that I still need to pay 2 more years. I have not seen mentioned defaulted in Chapter 13 borrowers that were left out of all waivers and not in all mentions of forgiveness, and even in this new rulemaking committee. Actual no payments on new loans were forgiven, but us, because we had a default on Chapter 13 with actual high payments, were left behind. Real money went into these loans. In my case, as a life event, I defaulted in 2017 and my taxes were garnished, a total of $8,000, which was comparable with my income-based repayment for 2 years. I hope these default payments were counted, or at least rehabilitation forbearance, which were over 500 months for 10 months. The reasoning why rehabilitation forbearance payments are not counted is beyond me. I have struggled with the student loan system and trying to find answers. Due to the statutes of default and Chapter 13 forbearance, we can even use time to buy back these periods. It feels like a punishment. Please, if someone propose some kind of change to help us, especially since in good faith we rehabilitated our loans. Before consolidating, a lot of us had failed loans. These loans went through multiple services and errors were made, especially coding our loans against our will, with school deferments and other type of deferments and not properly informing us. Many of us made payments, but nothing of that comes to for forgiveness because these records are all over the place and not accurate. And the burden is it's on us to prove that these were not. We're basically at the mercy of Mohila or someone doing reconsideration requests that never answers to approve and realize the mistake that other services made, which seems to be happening at random. Prior to 2013, there were no forms to waive, for example, school deferments, and if you requested it by phone, it was useless. And
30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. And services would place borrowers in deferments at their leisures. And this is not acceptable. It's not acceptable that we still having all these issues. And we went to a rulemaking committee and still having all this issue, and we cannot get forgiveness. Thank you so much.
Joanne. Folks, thank you for staying over. We have one more person who was in line to comment. We're going to go ahead and let them in, and then this is our last public commenter for the day.
I just admitted Lorraine Galvis, who's here representing herself.
All right. Lorraine, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Fantastic, Lorraine. Thank you. You're our last public commenter for the day. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning, and your time begins now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the committee for this opportunity. I am speaking on behalf of myself, but I am also a licensed professional. I don't have any undergraduate student loans, but I do have Grad Plus loans from having attended law school. When I graduated law school, my loans were $179,000, and in 6 years, those ballooned to $228,000. Of those $228,000, during COVID, I paid back $37,000 while I was also undergoing chemo and radiation for breast cancer. I'm a 2-time breast cancer survivor, and I should have been using my disability benefits to pay for medical care and my bills. But honestly, most of this money went to student loans because there was a pause during COVID, and I found an opportunity to make a dent in how much I owed. And I just want to highlight to the committee the predatory nature of these loans. I never could have imagined getting cancer, but at the same time, I, am one of those entrepreneurs and Grad Plus recipients who have actually made good faith efforts to pay their loans back. And I just don't see that the system recognizes that or tries to support people that are actually trying to pay back their loans. And I want to make sure that this population and this group, which is mostly entrepreneurs, we're often in a class where we don't qualify for forgiveness. We don't qualify for a lot of the programs, but we do want to repay our loans. I was being serviced by Great Lakes, and I was told by Great Lakes at the time that I was not able to make a payment toward my principal because I had to pay back $52,000 in interest first. And I would like to see if the committee would be able to find some relief for folks that did make payments during the COVID pause, because they should have been treated as excess payments. Of my $37,000, only $27,000 went to interest and $10,000 went to principal. So, I'm just hoping that there can be some relief. I feel like many of the things that I wanted to say have already been shared with this committee, and I'm very grateful for that. But I just wanted to highlight some of us that may be overlooked by some of these plans with the administration that we don't necessarily qualify
30
for.
seconds remaining.
Thank you so much for your time. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the public comments.
We do actually have one more
Yeah.
late attendee, if that's okay. So I believe he'll be our final speaker, and that's Representative Cesar Aguilar, who represents Arizona's 26th district.
Welcome, Representative Aguilar. Thank you for coming here to make a public comment before negotiators. You'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning, and your time begins right now.
Awesome. Yeah, so State Representative Cesar Aguilar from Arizona. I represent Legislative District 26, which encompasses Central and West Phoenix. I also am the former Executive Director for the Arizona Students Association, which as a college student, I used to sit on the board of the United States Student Association, which we worked really closely with the Department of Education and the White House on reforming higher education and student loans. I represent a very young district in the state of Arizona, and most of the families that live in my district look just like me, within 30 years of age, and up to 40 years old. And it's a lot of young people with a large amount of student loans. Nearly 900,000 Arizonans would have benefited from student loan cancellation with President Biden's plan to cancel student loans, which is 12.4% of Arizona state population. The average student loan in Arizona is about $33,396, and we are the 15th highest state with the number of borrowers in the country who would have seen a huge economic financial relief with the cancellation of student loans. So I just wanted to come in here and please, or talk to you all and ask for your support and making sure that you're thinking of Arizonans when you're setting these rules. Arizona is a very free market system type of state where we've had many private colleges come in and then close down. And many of those students end up in my district having to end up paying these college debt off. And they end up leaving these institutions with a degree that doesn't hold much weight, with an institution that no longer exists, within a degree that didn't really give them the tools to do their job. And also many of these institutions promised them a network where they could go and get another job that helps them land a job.
30 seconds remaining.
And so many of these institutions have been very predatory to our constituents, and we just want to make sure that we're heard in the state of Arizona and that we're holding these institutions accountable, but also thinking of them when we're setting rules on student loan cancellation from the department. And thank you, and sorry for coming late. I got the email for 3:30, and in Arizona we're at 2 o'clock, so a couple hour differences.
Thank you, Representative Aguilar. And that concludes our public comment for session 2. Tammy, was there anything that the department wanted to address before?
Thank you, John. We certainly want to thank all of our negotiators, our public, for making comment, all of the behind the scenes from the logistical team on the ed side, my PCG, the policy coordination group side, and all of those that have participated during these negotiations for the last couple of days. You've given us so much to think about, and we look forward to providing you with amended regulatory text around these issues. We hope to have all of your proposals to us by the 14th so that we can actively turn those into a mandatory text for your review. We wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you again for such robust conversation around such important issues. We look forward to continuing to work with you on the third and final session, and we hope that everyone has a blessed rest of your evening.
Thank you, Tammy. And with that, we are adjourned until our December session, and have a good day.